Great. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Well, welcome back to our third panel today. For those of you in the audience who are just joining, I'll mention briefly, my name's George Koch. I'm a professor here at NAU and one of the co-organizers of this Bumpy Road to Net Zero conference. So thank you for joining us. I want to just briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then they can say a little bit more about themselves and why presumably we targeted them for participation today. And I would also say I will be keeping an eye on that Q&A box and keeping track of questions. I'm really excited about this panel because in a lot of ways, you know, this is what it's all about. There's all sorts of goodwill towards this sort of thing. But really, how do we get it done? And what do we do to make sure we're doing things that we said we would do? So implementation and accountability are kind of where the rubber meets the road. All right, so our panelists today are Jessica Berry, Director of the Office of Sustainability at Brown University, Alan Townsend, Dean of the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana, and Dave Newport, Director of the Environmental Center at the University of Colorado at Boulder. So thanks to each of you for agreeing to join us today. And perhaps in that order, Jessica, Alan, Dave, I'll just turn it over to you guys to say a little bit more about yourselves. Thanks.
Great, thanks, George. As George said, I'm Jessica Berry. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainability at Brown, which is housed in facilities management. But it's a bit of a unique office where we really reach across the university to implement sustainability initiatives. And I partner pretty frequently with the Assistant Provost for Sustainability, which is a new position that the Provost Office created when we started to have discussions of where we were going to go beyond our 2020 goals. I've been with Brown for about 6.5 years, and I started in the Office of Sustainability, but as a program manager, and have since been in the director position for about 3 years, and jumped right in to defining our new GHG goals beyond our 2007 goals that were created prior to my being at Brown.
Great. Alan.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As George mentioned, I'm Alan Townsend, and I'm currently the Dean up at the College of Forestry and Conservation in Montana, but it's a relatively new post. Have a long history in working in some of these spaces, but I'm here mostly today, I think, because of my most recent role when I served as the Provost at Colorado College, and both the Office of Sustainability there reported to me, and CC was on a long-term goal of about a decade to reach carbon neutrality, and did so last January. So I think part of my role today is to talk about some lessons there and how that was achieved.
Great, thanks. And Dave.
I see you, Dave.
Nice to see you, Alan. Long time no see.
Yeah.
Alan didn't pass this along, but he's also late of the University of Colorado Boulder, when I had the pleasure of working with him here. Yes, Dave Newport, CU Boulder. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel with these distinguished experts. I'm not sure how I got here, but I'll take it. It's the payback for putting in probably 5 years of my life to do the carbon action plan for the University of Colorado Boulder in 2007 or 8, seems like several lifetimes ago, which we did with a cross-section of university staff and experts. Alan and his colleagues were very helpful, of course. At that time, we then took it to NREL, where they took it into a back room and beat it with rubber hoses and made it spill its secrets, and sent us back a cheat sheet of modest corrections and tweaks to it. And so we basically got it NREL approved. We then submitted it to the chancellor at the time, Bud Peterson, himself a PhD mechanical engineer who built coal plants for a living after he graduated from Texas A&M. And we had a long uphill conversation with him about how this was going to happen. And he understood it technically, he understood it ethically, and we took it to the Board of Regents, had it approved, and we're directed to implement it. So that was a process that I prefer not to go through again. And I'm hoping today to learn of a more efficient pathway to action.
Well, great. Thank you all for those intros. And Dave, that is what this is supposed to all be about, sharing lessons learned and how we can all move forward more effectively. So good segue there. So what I'd like to do now is to begin having you each address a series of framing questions that you've seen, of course, about your institution's carbon neutrality programs. And sort of the first one is a really obviously a key one. How did you decide on a date for achieving your campus goal? And this is one that really hits home for me, because right now NAU is in the process of developing a climate action plan with a consulting company, providing a lot of guidance there. And we've had some discussions about what is our goal? What is that date for what? And, for me, it kind of, I could sort of polarize this. It's popular to polarize things, but I could simplify things just by saying, some say where there's a will, there's a way, and some say, well, let's figure out the way and then we'll create the will. And probably things tend to fall somewhere in between that. But why don't we tackle this question? How did you decide on a date for achieving your campus goal? And paired with that, might as well say, what kind of goal did you set? Net zero, carbon neutrality, or something else? And just for efficiency, why don't we stick with the Jess, Alan, Dave sequence, unless you want to deviate. Okay, so go for it, Jess.
Sure. So I think, working with faculty and operational staff, we looked at this as our goal was to look at what the UN has pretty much said, that by 2050, we really need to curb global emissions in order to kind of limit the temperature increase to, I think it's 1.5 degrees. And we took that as, scientific consensus, and that was going to be something that we were going to shoot for. But we certainly wanted to do better if we could. But then what came into play with that is what's operationally and financially reasonable for us to meet our new goal. And we knew that our new goal was going to be a net zero goal. And so I think, what it came down to is balancing those three areas of operational, financial, and scientific consensus to decide what our new goals would be. And what we came up with was that Brown was going to be net zero by 2040, and also reduce emissions by 75% by 2025 from our 2018 baseline.
Okay. Alan.
So in our case, and in this case, I'm speaking again for Colorado College, it was less comprehensively thoughtful than what Jessica just described, I would say, and partly in the sense that it was a real early adopter. So the CC's path towards carbon neutrality began with a student-led effort, and sort of a core group of students in 2009 that were really committed to this goal and took it straight to the president. One of the things that's in some ways easier to achieve in a small liberal arts college, but can be done anywhere. And they were persistent and they were vocal, and they ultimately got his attention and convinced him to give it an airing in front of the Board of Trustees and to set that goal. And as I understand it, that it was essentially a decadal goal right at the time, which translated into a 2020 target. And I've heard tales ever since that at the time, I think to the president at the time, he in the end figured like, oh, it's a good goal and that's a long ways away, so sure, why not? Mm-hmm. But that's how it started, and that was really critical though, because it put a definitive marker out there that was ultimately endorsed from the presidential level and by the Board of Trustees that in and of itself had some accountability to it.
Thanks, Alan. Over to you, Dave.
Well, I wish we'd used Jess's approach and Brown's approach, really looking at what the overall carbon budget of the planet is and what our respective role is within that budget, and executed accordingly. That was not how we approached this in 2008. And I'm not sure that that was the prevailing model at that time. I wish it was. I think it would have been a lot easier, a lot less debate. But at any rate, what we did do, again, given that our chancellor is a knowledgeable, fair-minded technological engineer, was technologically based. What was technologically feasible was a major criteria of what was going in. Of course, you're being asked to extrapolate that speculation of what is going to be technologically feasible into the future, well into the future, which was speculative. And but we took that challenge earnestly, and we asked some of the 44 IPCC scientists that are on our research faculty to opine as to where that was going. And that came back with some fairly startling predictions from members of the faculty, including the prediction that by 2040, Colorado, which right now, or at the time, was predominantly coal, in terms of the supplies through the grid, would in fact see the input from a nuke plant somewhere to be located in the grid in the Colorado area into our grid, thus substantially lowering the carbon footprint of the emissions factor and so forth, but was certainly controversial. At any rate, that was the word back from our folks, so we dialed that in. Likewise, in addition to being technologically minded, the chancellor was also very keen that we answer to an elected board of regents, one of only 4 states in the nation where the public flagship university reports to elected board of regents, which were preponderance majority Republican and conservative at the time. And this was all a very alien concept. And he wanted to generate as much political support as possible. So to answer your question, George, we didn't get to a zero goal. We went to an 80% reduction by 2050, with the explanation being that it's just too far in the distant future to technologically predict what is going to be achievable. And we'll get back to it. And our first benchmark is a 20% reduction in overall emissions by 20. And the clock's running for another month or two, and whether we're going to hit that.
All right. Well, thanks. It kind of brings up a related question that isn't in our list, but I'll maybe just hit it really short, briefly. You each mentioned individual years for your targets. We've had some discussion here about ranges of years. Let's try to get to X% by from 20 something to 20 something plus in. Did you find it useful to really pick a year, or was there any discussion of a range of target years? I guess any of you could chime in on that one.
We did not have a real discussion about a range. Certainly, it was brought up in kind of casual conversation of if we should or if we shouldn't. I think, while we have goals, while we have the 2025 goal and 2040 goal, things, unexpected things happen in the world, as we know, in this past year. And things might shift to the left or to the right. And so there has to be an understanding of a bit of flexibility in that date. Although, I know we're going to talk about accountability soon, but there still needs to be accountability to the goal date set, with the understanding that there are influences outside of our control sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this is hindcasting for me again, obviously, but I know that in talking with the folks involved at CC, the specific goal on a specific date did prove important at moments in that, because, and that gets into what Jessica said around accountability. It held feet to the fire a little bit more in just making what it takes to do this, right? It's not one giant sweep. It's steady progress year after year after year. And but it created an urgency and target around that even allowed for key logistical things from a upper administration standpoint about definitive planning, right? Like, okay, we have 5 years, we need to get it. This is the kind of investment we think it's going to take. This is the return. That there wasn't a fuzziness around that, and that was helpful.
Right, right. Yeah, I can imagine. Thanks, Alan. Anything extra, Dave?
Sure. I mean, the goals issue we talked about a lot. Again, we put this together in 2008. I think we had it approved in 2009. Consequently, or coincidentally, the governor of the Colorado at the time, Bill Ritter, issued an executive order for some an across the board sort of sustainability or executive order for goals that he wanted to see executed by 2012. And so we rolled those into the plan because the governor said to do them. And even though we are, I have to say this, a sovereign entity, not beholden to the governor's administration, we have an elected board of regents, as I indicated. We decided that we're going to play ball with the governor, and these goals were the state goals. And so as flagship university, we wanted to support those. And so there were some modest goals in there. Carbon was not one of them directly, but we wanted to execute against that. And then, and I believe we met those goals. And in the years between 2012 and now, and this is a segue, I think, to the accountability question, it would have been very helpful to have much more robust annual review and accountability from third parties or whoever was managing this, as opposed to the land sitting on the shelf and we got till 2020 to knock this out.
Yeah.
Nobody saw COVID coming, and we're all facing an uphill battle now from that increase probably in emissions this year.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we'll try to get back to the COVID thing if we have time, and also just what does it mean to not reach a goal. But let's move into that sort of evaluation and accountability realm there. So what has been the process for evaluating progress towards your goal? What are the benchmarks, or what are the mechanisms that you guys have in place at your institutions? Again, Jess, if you wouldn't mind leading off.
Sure. So prior to this this new goal, we did have a goal back in 2007 for a 2020 goal, and the accountability for that goal was really internal, and it was reported out just internally to leadership. It was reported in our annual report. It was based out of a Excel file of utility statements and things like that. It was pretty from when I came in, it was pretty archaic. And when we set these new goals, we really understood that we had to have some sort of legitimate and verified accountability mechanism. And so one of my best hires in my office was a data scientist, which he was able to build out a platform where we would have a solid reporting of our emissions. It would be third-party verified through the climate registry annually. And we've just finished up our baseline reporting through the climate registry and have started our fiscal year 20 reporting. And so that where we stand now will be accountable through the climate registry and that third-party verification platform.
Neat. Just a quick question to follow up there. Was that data scientist hired specifically for your greenhouse gas, your climate plan and process?
Yeah, great question. That's his primary role. He will, once that's pretty solidified, he will still manage that, but he will also start to branch out to our other sustainability efforts and manage that data across campus.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Alan.
So, in CC's case, it's sort of a few things on that, right? So there's a joint annual accountability responsibility from both the facilities management and kind of right up to the top of the university in terms of the vice president for finance and operations, or whatever his title was, I forget now, but that oversaw that to keep them on task as one of the goals for making progress each year in investing in projects that would carry us forward towards this goal. And then part of every annual report that was put together on that side of campus included metrics and report out on progress, right? Where were we in terms of energy use and in that, and then that was done. That side was then partnered with the Office of Sustainability and the director, Jessica's equivalent position there, and the rest to go through and do the greenhouse gas accounting on that and work with that. Students actually played a big role at CC in doing that, in handling a lot of that work sometimes in a variety of ways, but some of the more direct employees of the office who would work with it under Ian, who was our Director of Sustainability's direction, and then again in partnership with facilities, so that we would have an annual dashboard that we would see every year, that was then shared not only with my office, the Provost's office, with the president, but with the Board of Trustees as well. And that was just kind of part of the regular culture every year to say, where are we? How's this going? What's going? And then part of that annual check-in, and we would refer to this in between those times too, but would be also, what's the forward looking? What are the next steps given this that we think are going to make the next progress for the next year, and what's the next year's benchmark, not just the one that was X years out to hit the carbon neutrality. So it was sort of a regular part of annual operations and report out, much like doing your budgets and the rest. It was just embedded in it.
Yeah, and was that dashboard something that was sort of advertised and known to the campus community, so people could say, oh yeah, we're doing it?
Yeah, it was kind of widely known. It was available to anybody who wanted to see it every year. And in fact, beyond the campus, I mean, those reports were out there. Folks could get them and kind of see what we were doing and have contacts. And so it was it was an open part of the stated priorities right from the top, with open information on where we stood.
Yeah, great. Thanks. How about you, Dave?
Well, the Board of Regents when approving and directing the campus to implement the plan 12 years ago, asked that every 3 years that the campus come back to the Board of Regents with a status report. And so that was the formality of accountability along the way. I will say that at the same time that the plan was approved for the campus, CU's student government, which is third or fourth largest in the United States, for some anomalous reasons, but nonetheless is what it is. We're certainly not the third or fourth largest university in the United States, although we're sort of on the list. But and Alan probably remembers this when he was here. CU student government operates, owns, if you will, figuratively, and pays for the operations of three of the largest facilities on the campus: the student union building, which is the busiest, the recreation center, which is enormous, and at the time the infirmary, which is of course a medical center. And so the student government also approved a carbon neutrality plan for those three buildings, and we implemented that. And student government at CU hit carbon neutrality 7 or 8 years ago for those now 2 buildings. The infirmary was moved off the list, but at any rate, I guess the short story is that student leadership provided accountability, if you will, in terms of the students were leaning in and making their wishes known for how the campus should also prosecute its climate action plan. So without students, obviously, that accountability wouldn't happen. Likewise, the students in the last couple of years now have increased their action on this front. The original plan that we approved, again, was scopes 1 and 2 emissions only, and that's an important distinction here, that we did not include any scope 3 sources because they're variable and you get disparate inclusion in climate action plans depending on what organization or campus is reporting them and so forth, and because they're a bear. And we at the time were, happy to get the scopes 1 and 2 stuff done because that's stuff that was actionable. But in the last couple of years, students have now advanced into several of the scope 3 things and are looking to expand that all the more. In fact, this morning there was a conversation with our purchasing people about how we're going to start looking at our purchasing, which is $1.4 billion a year, in terms of analyzing that. So there's been some robust improvement in that accountability but it's not formal, it's not ongoing, and not as frequent as it should be.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's see. I'm just going to take a quick look at a Q&A question here. Yeah, this is a comment really that's saying that this person has learned a lot already this morning about how important it is to have the highest levels of administration involved with these efforts. And they are proposing that if you want to have students stay engaged and active, then you also must pay them and give them a voice or power in the decision making. And I think you're all getting at this in various ways, but if there's something more to that comment you'd like to add, we could do that now. So maybe more on the student piece of the accountability, which hasn't directly come out, but if there's something there for you, please chime in.
Well, I would say, students are more in step with contemporary issues and urgencies probably than us old white guys. And thank God for that. And of late, and especially in 2020, student advocacy for anti-racism, social justice, climate justice, energy justice, all of those topics has advanced rapidly, to the extent that we're really redrawing our sense of what sustainability and climate action is, to really go through the doors of climate justice and anti-racism on the way to climate action, so that climate action is not just for the privileged old white guys that live in Boulder. Mm-hmm. And it serves underrepresented and marginalized communities and stakeholders equally. And I think that voice and that vision is a prerequisite for us moving forward with our revised climate action plan, which is in the pipeline of being executed as we speak, certainly being compiled and all that, but that'll take a while. And really bringing in that element to otherwise just counting carbon beans and energy projects, and purchasing and all great technological stuff. But if it doesn't have a face on it and it doesn't serve the broader population, then I think we're missing the mark. And the students have certainly been voicing that. As a result, they have pushed the sensitivity of this issue, racism, anti-racism, and so forth on the campus, which is always influential in the vectors of administrative leadership discourse and frankly politics. And I welcome that. And I think that's the path forward that we're going to see from the students. As a result, they've been put on the executive committee for the energy master plan that we are currently executing through a consultant and so forth. And I think that voice will be much more broadly representative going forward.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
I might jump in on that too. It's a little bit of a pivot in part, but thank you for addressing that, Dave, because I think that's a really critical point that I want to underscore as well, and talk about direct operations and things that can be done in these plans, right? And so first, before I get to that, I mean, for students who are listening and seeing this, I mean, student voice is so powerful and so critical in this in so many levels. I mean, the CC's target doesn't happen without student engagement at the beginning. It just doesn't. Students are often much more effective to driving change, even though I know it doesn't sometimes feel that way as a student within higher education than say faculty and staff are. They have a power and they have a voice that they can use and they should use. CC success, even in kind of the overall launch and then the annual accountability, was on student engagement at lots of levels. So as the commenter noted, part of that it was paid positions, and part of that was some seats at the table, but part of that was other engagement too. It was classroom engagement, it was volunteer engagement, it was just kind of yes and on all fronts that really mattered to the whole path with various entry points. And then the last, to Dave's point about evolving metrics of what this means, that's really critical. And that was the core of the conversation that we had in the college over the last couple of years. As we knew we were coming close to reaching that 2020 goal, what I was tasked with for the whole college was just starting to say, what next? And ask that question. And that was the core of where we came to and what we said. And so, I don't know, I'm gone now, but I know what where I left it and going there, that the decisions around the next step was not just maintaining and trying to go past, hitting that neutrality goal, but a shift in even the overt overall goal to be dual, right? To continue to make progress on reducing emissions and doing that, but to have all that go through an equal lens of social and environmental justice and anti-racism in all of the decisions made, with an explicit recognition in the rewrite of the path that sometimes that actually might mean making a choice to quantitatively not reduce a given amount of emissions quite as much because you're meeting those goals more preferentially. And that is a noticeable shift, and one that we found really important too. And it's actionable, right? It's everything from, like all of us, if part of what you're doing is having to meet neutrality by some sorts of offsets, as we all do to varying degrees in that, what are you choosing there? And how do you put that lens on it? Not just what's the reduction implied in that offset, but what's the larger environmental and social good and justice embedded within it? And that's become an operational goal within the next phase for the college, as far as I know at this point.
Yeah, great. Well, got a couple more questions and not a whole lot of time, so I may high grade a little bit here, but just wanted to ask if there are any kind of details of your institution's organizational structure that either provided or hindered sort of the authority, the strength of the voice for accountability and for driving your implementation programs. So it really gets at, what I guess the question could be distilled as what's the essential bureaucratic structure to make this work within an organization like a university?
So I think I came in at a really interesting time where, as the director, where 2020 was closing in, the former director was leaving, and I think that there was faculty and students that were kind of chomping at the bit to see what was next, and I was there, and I think that that when I came in, they were really eager to start conversations with me, and in particular, one faculty member was really passionate about this, and he and I developed a strong relationship around this, and he was eventually appointed to the Assistant Provost for Sustainability, as I had mentioned, and had a direct contact with the provost in the president's office. And while I was kind of once removed, I could, I was able to have conversations with the VP of Facilities and the EVP of Finance and Administration. I was really unable to kind of break that barrier between the operational side and the president and provost, which is really where the strategic initiatives at Brown kind of evolved from. And are solidified. And so I think that was a really important relationship and position that was developed. I will say from the staff side, it's essential to have student and faculty engagement and buy-in and partnerships. They're just traditionally more listened to than staff are when it comes to big initiatives like this. So that was really key in of our organizational structure to move things along.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we heard some of that this morning in the opening panel, that just how key it is to have either the president or someone empowered by a university president to drive this whole thing forward and to connect some of those pieces that normally are siloed off in the universities. Alan or Dave?
Yeah, I mean, since the point has been stressed, it seems all morning, about the importance at the very top, which I like. It's essential. It just doesn't happen without it, I don't think. But I might go beyond. And another one, Jessica mentioned that her office is embedded within facilities there, in terms of structural things that you need. So I know a really key so two things are really key to see success beyond what I've mentioned. One was that there's a facilities engineer there who's pretty high level in the organization, who's really technically savvy and also really cares. So understands how to evaluate the opportunities and make the good choices to go forward. And then paired to that is that he was empowered and charged to do so as a priority from the top and given resources. And so, you know, there were resources that were set aside every year within the university's, you know, in our budgets, the facilities budgets, and the to be put in this direction to make progress towards that carbon neutrality goal. And critically, I think, and this has probably come up this morning too, but as time evolves, at the beginning, that's just making a choice about your budget and shifting new ways. But with time, you know, we started to accrue the savings. I mean, by the time we hit carbon neutrality last year at the college, it was over $6 million in accrued saved energy costs from that. And so some of that can then just start to flow back into making the progress every year. But then that group of people and facilities was absolutely essential for making the best possible choices that we could make. That's one. The second was having some folks in the university who were aware and up to speed, who could work on the partnerships and policy approaches beyond the borders of the university. So specifically there, the neutrality goal at CC was ultimately hit last January because of a partnership with Colorado Springs Utilities around a new solar array. And without that, we don't hit it, right? And that was to bring our scope 2 emissions down to 0. And we weren't the only client of that, but we were an early driver as a willing partner and a willing user of that facility with consistent conversations with those utility and other partners about coming together to try to drive progress there. And so you needed a couple of people within the structure of the university who had both the resources and the job charge to do that with the expertise. And it's not a ton of people, really. I mean, it really wasn't, right? But it was a couple key people that made all the difference because of their background and where they sat.
Alan, just to follow up, what was the title of the person who sort of did that external negotiation with the power company?
Well, that varied, right? And so much of it, so our director of sustainability was engaged in a lot of those high level conversations, but that's where leadership mattered. So, you know, there were times when even our president would have some conversations about that, or others in leadership who were just up to speed when necessary would kind of put the, you know, the stamp of reality behind the institution to say, yeah, this is real, right? We're behind this one. So it was a bit of a mix.
Yeah, got it. Dave, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, my dog has a thought. Sorry about that. Just to reinforce very quickly, Alan's leadership counts, and no question about it. I want to give Alan and CC a lot of credit for their achievement. Likewise, perhaps in large public universities, the example in this state anyway is up the road from us in Fort Collins, Colorado State University, that has come from a position of perceived disadvantage against the University of Colorado. In 2008, we were the first Sierra #1 AAU school in the United States, and you know, we were sailing. And shortly after that, CSU went to Stars Platinum, and openly to this day advertise and are proud of the fact that they don't have a sustainability director, because they don't need one. He sits in the president's office, and now she sits in the president's office. And when they want to get things done, the president says, what do we need to do to make it happen? They just put an array at 17 or 18 rooftop solar systems in around campus, which we know not to be cost effective compared to a big array out somewhere else, but they're doing it because they understand the billboard power of the, you know, and perhaps more striking, they've just committed to, I forget the number, a large number of square feet of ground source, you know, geothermal for heating and cooling their buildings, which we know the ROI on that is very long. In Colorado, just under 100 years, if you look at it strictly financially. But, you know, where are we going, right, is the question, not the ROI. We're not going to leave town. We're not going to sell these buildings. And
Right.
Their leader said, you know, damn the ROI, full speed ahead on this. And so my hat's off to my colleagues up the road.
Yeah, well, great. Hey, that both you and Alan kind of led us into another of our questions, and perhaps will be our last one. But you know, how important has been that ROI? I guess couched as a revolving fund, which I know, Alan, you mentioned one already. So if each of you could touch on the application of a revolving fund at the institutions you've worked with, that'd be great.
Sure. I don't know if I'd call ours a revolving fund, but I will say that when we undertook this, we wanted to, it was really important to have a financial plan around this. And so an operation, as I said, an operational plan, a technological plan and a financial plan. And so some of the ways that we're paying for this is we've reallocated some energy efficiency and renewal funds for these long-term projects. Obviously, some of the renewal was kind of naturally going to happen through these buildings. And kind of on the coattails of that was the development of new building standards that required all new buildings or major renovation to be net zero or net zero ready if they were attached to our central heat loop. And so there are savings associated with that, just kind of naturally from those standards. Then kind of the majority of the savings are expected to come from our virtual net metering power purchase agreements. So we've entered into 2 power purchase agreements. One is a solar array in Rhode Island that we partnered with a developer, and then we partnered with a developer for a much smaller wind project in Texas. And so those are really the main ways that we're paying for this, what we expect to be about $250 million of decarbonization across campus. And then there's also the overall university financial commitment to meet the goals. So it's expected that the university will continue to invest in that beyond any savings that we find through the sources that I just mentioned.
Okay.
George, I might add to that a couple things on this that I think are broad, beyond our experience, right? So I already mentioned, we had, as we started to see the proof in the pudding just on the bottom line in terms of saved energy costs, that helps to continue to defend the program, that helps to free up some funds to do the next things. There are 2 other parts of ROI, though, that I think are really key for especially academic leaders to keep in mind that are sometimes a little bit harder to quantify. One was we're in the business of recruiting and retaining students at universities and colleges, and students, as Dave already mentioned, increasingly care about this, and they gravitate to places and they go places and they stay places in greater and greater numbers because of these commitments. And so it might be harder to connect the dots, but I guarantee you those dots are there, and often in far bigger dollars and far bigger support than you might just see on the energy side. And that shouldn't be forgotten in this in terms of what it will really return if you do it. And the other is that what we started to see some success in, and I know every institution varies, but is in philanthropy, right? We've got growing numbers of folks who are really interested in supporting this going forward, and supporters of universities and colleges. And like a lot of philanthropists who are willing to give bigger money, they want to see a there and a commitment. But when they see that, they start to be willing to come to the table and think about ways they can help that commitment be even bigger and accelerate that they won't do if they don't see that commitment from the top.
Yeah, great. It was mentioned earlier this morning that maybe philanthropists would rather have their name on a giant heat pump than on a dorm, for example. And I thought that was a nice distillation of that idea. Well, we are officially out of time. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, but I think we are out of time. It's 1 o'clock here in Flagstaff. There have been several other really good comments and questions from the Q&A, and I wish we had time to address those. I may try to hit you guys up for those later, or I will at least send them along for your cogitation. But for now, I just want to thank each of you again. It's been really great having you here. I hope that everyone who's been listening in, whether you're a student or an administrator or faculty member or whatever, just concerned citizen, is starting to appreciate the challenge of implementing a strong carbon action plan at a university, and yet so many great examples of how putting your will behind that and saying this is going to be a priority can really make things happen. So thanks you all again, and we'll take we'll take a break until tomorrow. Actually, we're done for today. So thanks very much to all the panelists.
Thanks everybody. Thanks, George.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.